Boldwood presents Just Say Yes, written by Maxine Morrey and read by Gloria Sanders. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. For Dad, love you, kiss kiss. Chapter 1. Another deafening thunderclap boomed over the cottage as lightning illuminated the dark day. The first rain in months fell heavily as the summer heatwave finally broke, sending that wonderful smell of petrichor drifting in through the open windows. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to be doing much to clear the humidity, and the air was still clammy as I listened to the steady drip, drip, drip from my leaking roof into the bucket I'd just emptied. The heat, although stifling, had at least been a respite from the emergency of a failing roof. That was the thing about old properties. They always held another surprise for you, and not always the good kind. My little cottage might look like the picture on a chocolate box, but right now it was about as watertight as one. I crossed my fingers that today would help me get one step closer to changing that. I glanced in the mirror, checking my appearance. I twisted my long auburn hair up and secured it neatly in a clip, keeping it off my neck in an attempt to stay cool, and then headed down the narrow stairs just as the brass doorbell clanged outside. Pulling open the heavy front door revealed the epitome of tall, dark, handsome, not to mention broad, stranger loitering there. From the emails I'd exchanged so far with the bride whose wedding I was being hired to plan, my initial thoughts were that she had great taste. Now, seeing the man she was to marry, it seemed I was right. He was looking around, striking dark blue eyes taking in the cluster of picturesque houses that hugged the village green, before his gaze returned to my own cottage. I was used to seeing this sense of wonder. I still got it myself at times when I came home, a feeling of surprise that this idyllic scene existed at all, let alone within easy access to London. I smiled, waiting patiently for the ensuing compliment. Jesus, the soft Irish accent proclaimed. It's like something out of Midsummer Murders. I forced the smile to stay in place, mentally readjusting my earlier thoughts about the bride's taste. Clearing my throat, I stepped back from the door to indicate he should enter. Well, the police did find someone last month tied to the railway tracks in the model village with a toy train wedged in his mouth. But apart from that, it's a perfectly lovely place to live. Would you like to come in? The man was staring at me. Don't worry. I promise it wasn't me. Do come in out of the rain. I already had more than enough unwanted water coming into this house without standing here waiting for this rude man to let yet more in. His comment had irked me. It wasn't as if us villagers hadn't joked about the same thing ourselves, but there was something in the way he said it, as though he were laughing up his expensive sleeve at us, or would have been, had they not been rolled up to his elbows, exposing tanned, muscular forearms. He stepped in and I took the black old-fashioned umbrella with its beautiful carved wooden handle from him and opened it to dry in the small boot room to the side of the front door. He might not have manners, but he did have good taste. Do you always invite strange men into your house without asking their name? One coal-black brow rose, accompanying the softly spoken query. I'm afraid your accent gave you away, and you are perfectly on time, Mr. Kelly. I'm not Mr. Kelly, the man replied, studying me, a hint of amusement showing at the corner of the just full enough lips. A cool shiver trickled down my spine, despite the humidity of the day. The man's smile widened. Don't look so panicked, you're quite safe. I'm his best man, Lorcan O'Malley. He held one large hand out. Pleased to meet you. I stuck out my own automatically, unsure what to make of this man other than the fact that he was probably one of the best-looking men I'd ever come across. Why did I only ever meet desirable men through work? I had a very strict policy about not mixing work with pleasure, and right now, work needed all the attention it could get. The pandemic had meant that my business, Hearts and Flowers, along with many like mine, had taken a big hit, so now I needed to find a way to recoup the losses I'd suffered. A lavish wedding for an American heiress could be the answer to, if not all my prayers, then at least some of them. Patrick should be here any minute. He's always late. Oh dear. Hopefully he won't be late to the wedding, I said, looking up at Lorcan. I guess that's my job to ensure he isn't. Glad to hear you're already serious about your duties, I smiled. I might not be a fan of weddings or marriage, but I won't let Patrick down. I see, I replied, and made a mental note to keep an eye on him, not exactly the toughest of tasks when a man looked like he did. Would you like to come through to the kitchen? I must apologise. Ordinarily, I hold meetings in my garden office, but the downpour has rather put paid to that today. I'm just waiting to have a path put in. In truth, I was waiting for the money to be able to afford a path, but we didn't need to go into details. No problem. I led the way through into the airy kitchen. Thankfully, my cottage, though old, wasn't listed, so I'd had leeway to make changes when I'd first moved in. Once dark and cramped, this room had been extended, and it now opened out with patio doors to the well-tended garden beyond, flooding the kitchen with light. It was probably my favourite room in the house. A loud thunk caused me to spin around, and I found Mr. O'Malley rubbing his forehead and looking as if he was gritting back a choice word or two. Oh, my goodness, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you to mind your head. I'm not used to having people as tall as you in the house. No problem, he said again. So was that true then? What you said about the model village thing? As much as I would have loved to continue stringing this man along with the tale, I couldn't do it, and a bubble of laughter burst from within me. Of course not, but you should have seen your face. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist the tease. He studied me for a moment, then grinned, full wattage, and a tiny voice inside me whispered, Wow. Nicely done, Miss Hart. Can I get you a drink or anything while we wait for the others? They should be here soon, and please call me Maddie. I wouldn't count on it. As I said, Patrick is always late, and his fiancée isn't much better. Bad weather can play havoc with travel plans. I'd rather they were late than anything happen. I turned back to face him as I said it, squashing the flash of memory that burst into my brain. Lorcan opened his mouth as if to say something, but appeared to change his mind as his eyes met mine. Definitely, he said. And a cold drink will be great, if it's not too much trouble. I have some homemade lemonade, or there's squash or water. Lemonade sounds great, thanks. I moved to the fridge and pulled out a large glass jug. Taking 2 tall glasses from a cupboard, I poured the pale liquid into them before returning the jug to the fridge, popped a sprig of mint in each glass from the mini herb garden I kept on the windowsill, and then handed one of the glasses to Lorcan. He took a sip. This is delicious. Homemade, you say? I did. By you? You seem surprised. Maybe, he answered cryptically. I clearly haven't worked you out yet. I gave him a cool look. There's not a lot to work out. See, that just makes me even more curious and think there's plenty to work out. There was a dangerous half-smile on his lips that in other circumstances I might have acknowledged as being sexy. Chapter 2. The bell clanged again, and I put down my glass, smoothed my hair quickly, and went to open the door to my clients, only to find Betty, my next-door neighbour, instead, with a plate full of pastries that smelled delicious. "Hello, love," she said, coming in as she usually did before I could say anything, bustling on through to the kitchen. "I've just made these cheese straws and there's too many. If I leave them in the kitchen, George will just eat them all, and you know I'm trying to watch his weight. Oh, hello," she said, coming to a halt as she saw Lorcan sitting at the kitchen table. "I'm so sorry, dear." She turned to me, her eyes shining with curiosity. "I didn't realise you had company." "It's work," I said quickly before Betty jumped to any conclusions, although, by the look on her face, she already had. Oh. The mischief disappeared from her kindly smile. The garden is too wet to get to the office, so I'm having to hold my meeting in here. Which is fine by me, if this is the service we get. Lorcan smiled, eyeing the treats. Well, aren't you the charmer? Betty laughed, holding out the plate towards him. Take two. Big lad like you. Don't mind if I do, thank you. He held out his hand. Lorcan O'Malley. It's nice to meet you. And you, dear. I'm Betty Collins. George and I live next door. It looks like a lovely village, he said, catching my eye as he said so, and I gave the tiniest brow raise acknowledging his earlier, slightly less flattering description of the place. It is. So, where's your lovely bride-to-be? Oh, I'm not the lucky chap. I'm just the best man. Ah, already tied the knot yourself, have you? My neighbour couldn't have been more transparent if she'd been made of plate glass. No, not me. Still a bachelor, I'm afraid, Betty. Is that so? I saw the mischief slip back into her smile. We live in hope of hearing that Maddie's finally arranging her own wedding. Thanks ever so much for the goodies, Betty, I said, interrupting her, my face suddenly hot. That was very kind of you. I'll have to do an extra lap of the lake to burn those off. Betty waved my protestations away. Oh, hush, there's barely anything of you, is there now, Mr. O'Malley? Oh, Lord, the last thing I wanted was Lorcan O'Malley's opinion on my figure. Well, we'd better get on, I said, gently hustling Betty away from Lorcan before he could reply. The bride and groom will be here any moment. Oh, yes, sorry, Duck. No, it's fine, really, and thank you so much again for the treats. You really shouldn't have. Got to feed you up a little bit, dear, she said, touching my cheek gently. All this worrying about the business and the house repairs has done you no good at all. I smiled, ushering Betty to the front door before she revealed any more about my private life to my visitor. Closing the door behind her, I took a deep breath and returned to the kitchen. Sorry about that. Usually I don't answer as I'm in the office, so she just knows to leave stuff in the kitchen. I assumed it would be Patrick and Peyton. They're going to be about another 15 minutes, Lorcan replied, looking up and waggling his phone. He just messaged me. I can only apologise for their appalling timekeeping. Have you got more appointments today? No, it's fine. I cleared the afternoon for them. The truth was, the afternoon, and in fact the rest of the week, was far too clear for my liking. He nodded. Betty seems nice. She is. Keen to hear news of you arranging your own wedding, by the sounds of it. Yes, I think that would make her day. No sign of that, then? I gave him a look. He shrugged. Just making conversation. I remembered how badly I needed this job and pasted on a smile. Yes, I know. I'm sorry, I just prefer to keep my private life private, that's all. Fair enough. He finished the last of his lemonade and stood to take the glass to the sink. Just leave it there, it's fine. He washed it up anyway. Do you ever do anything you're told? He turned and gave me that smile again. Now that, Maddie, would depend entirely on the situation. I felt a flush tinge my cheeks as Lorcan's smile grew. God, he was infuriating. And way too sexy for his own good. And certainly my own good. Where were my clients? I see what you mean about needing a path, Lorcan said, having now moved to the patio doors. His eyes took in the large muddy puddle that had once been the walkway to the garden office. I sighed. Yes, I'm sorry about having to hold the meeting in here. I know it doesn't look the most professional. Ah, don't be daft. It's perfectly lovely. Feels like a real home. I turned and he met my eyes, holding the gaze. Thank you. You're welcome. There was a pause, then he rubbed his forehead. Doorways could do with being a bit higher, though. I grinned. Yes, sorry, I should have warned you. Another reason it's better when the garden office is operational. I peered a little closer. I'm afraid that's going to leave a bruise. Don't worry about it. I'm sure I've had worse. Walk into a lot of doorways, do you? No. Most people I know don't live in hobbit houses. Charming. But I did used to be a bit of a scrapper when I was a nipper. Why doesn't that surprise me? He turned more fully towards me. I don't know. Why doesn't it? I looked up into his handsome face, that hint of trouble lingering in the dangerous smile. The silence stretched until it was broken by another enormous clap of thunder that made me physically jump. As it died away, another sound replaced it. A faint, howling cry drifted through the smaller windows I'd left open that wouldn't let rain in. What is that sound? Lorcan was already moving towards the front door, pulling it open and heading back to his car. The rain was bucketing down, and he was soaked through by the time he got to it, opening the door and attending to something inside. Grabbing his brolly, I rushed out after him, coming to a halt with the umbrella over both of us, as he lifted out a little dog, cuddling it to his chest and making soothing noises as the rain beat heavily on the fabric above us. You left a dog in the car in a thunderstorm. I glared at him. I didn't want to, he snapped back. He had water and the windows were open, so he had air, and I was about to come check on him anyway. I saw now there was plastic over the interior of the car, and the windows were indeed open a little. But still, not many dogs were content in a thunderstorm, and this one certainly didn't seem to be. What do you mean you didn't want to? I reached out and gave the dog's caramel-coloured head a little stroke. It seemed content enough now, snuggled against the broad chest of his owner. Bod comes everywhere with me normally, but Patrick said I wasn't to bring him into the meeting today. I didn't want to leave him at home because I didn't know how long I'd be, and he was sleeping when I left him in here. The vet gave me some stuff to help calm him in storms, but I guess it wore off. He fussed with the dog, kissing its soft, furry head and whispering that he was okay now. Come on inside now, both of you. You should have just spoken to me about it. It's my house, not Patrick's. You sure? Of course, come on, you're already soaked. I put my hand on his elbow and ushered them in as he briefly turned to beep the car locked, and we hurried up the front path. Closing the door behind us, I took the umbrella through to the boot room again and set it dripping on the tiled floor before returning to my guest, who was also dripping. Stay there, I said, before heading upstairs and rooting about in the back of the airing cupboard. Returning, I handed him a towel and a t-shirt and swapped them for the dog, whom I wrapped in a blanket. It might be a bit small. Lorcan rubbed his dark hair from sodden to merely damp with the towel. If it's yours, it's definitely going to be a bit small. He had a point. A size 8 shirt was not going to fit a 6'5" man who was built like the proverbial brick outhouse. It's not mine. I gave him a tight smile. He held it out. It was definitely a man's t-shirt, and he raised one dark brow in question. I ignored him and instead took the dog through to the kitchen and popped him down on the floor while I knelt and made a makeshift bed from a big, cosy blanket, leaving his owner to change his shirt in peace. I can hang your shirt in the airing cupboard if you... My words dried up as I turned and saw Lorcan in the t-shirt I'd given him. To say it was snug was an understatement. The previous owner, although tall, had definitely not had this man's bulk. Not only was it stretched impossibly tight across his pecs, his biceps were almost bursting the seams, and the too short hem exposed the merest hint of a flat, tanned stomach and a line of dark hair leading to places I had no right even acknowledging, let alone thinking about. Chapter 3. Fits perfectly, thanks. The laugh rippled out of me and his eyes crinkled as he joined in. I'm sorry. It's all I have. But you can't sit in that sodden shirt for the rest of the afternoon. It's fine. As you say, it's dry at least. Do you want me to hang the shirt somewhere? No, but thanks. I'll sort it when I get home. You've done more than enough. It's no trouble. He smiled down at where Bod was now snuggled into the blanket, his eyes closing as I drifted my hand over his soft fur. You're very kind. Although, if you have a bag or something, I could put it in so it doesn't drip everywhere over your floor. Give it here. I'll put it in the airing cupboard. It will hopefully dry off enough in there by the time we're done today. Thanks again. You sure it's okay to bring him in? I hated leaving him out there. His brow creased, and I could see the decision hadn't been taken lightly. Yes, I can see that now. I'm sorry I told you off. I know it was only out of concern for the dog. I'm surprised you listened to your friend, though. What's that supposed to mean? There was a look of interest mixed with amusement on his lips. It's just that, well, you seem like a man who knows his own mind. That's a tactful way of saying you think I can likely be a stubborn arse, isn't it? Not at all. Maybe. He gave me a disbelieving look. There was an unfortunate incident recently, and Patrick got a bit uppity about it all. I've known Paddy since we were both tiny, and he's not usually so tense, but I think this wedding lark and the fact his fiancée is an heiress have made him feel a bit under pressure. As his best man, I'm supposed to make his life easier. He gave a shrug. I think you're allowed to make your own decisions about your dog and his welfare. Anything else to do with the wedding, feel free to run by me. I gave him a serious look that showed I was not to be messed with, but all it did was make him smile. You look cute when you're trying to be serious. I am not trying to be serious. I am serious. He gave that killer grin again. Then you look cute when you do that too. Look, I'm happy to have your dog in here as he is clearly well behaved. If you're to stay, you need to be the same. Lorcan looked down at his dog, drifting off to sleep in his blanket nest. His eyelids were heavy, but the odd rumble was still making itself known in the distance, and he seemed reluctant to give in entirely. I'm more than happy to snuggle down there with him if you really want. Oh, goodness. I can see I'm going to have to keep my eye on you. Looks like there's going to be an upside in being involved in the planning of this wedding after all, he replied, grinning. No, I said firmly. No upside. He gave a small head tilt. I replayed the sentence back in my head. I mean, of course there is. It's all up. You get to be involved in helping your best friend plan the most beautiful day to begin his married life. But that's it. The sole upside. He shrugged, still with a hint of mischievous smile. Shame. And don't think I won't be warning the bridesmaids about you either. The last thing I need is you upsetting that particular apple cart. Are you always this severe on the best man? Only when required. Betty seemed to like me. Then when we're done, I'll send you round to Betty's. Until then, you need to behave. Moving past him, I double-checked the table, making sure I had all I needed. Lorcan glanced down at my coloured sticky notes, pens, neatly lined up pads, one for each person, and my main planner all organised on the table. His blue gaze then drifted to the fridge, where another colour-coded calendar was stuck, with my schedule for the week. You really like to be organised, don't you? It allows me to make the most efficient use of my time. I like to plan and know exactly what's happening and what's coming. It doesn't matter how much you plan. You don't know what life has in store. Which is exactly the reason it's good to plan as much as possible so that you have as few surprises as possible. I hate to say this, Maddie, but it doesn't work like that. I was the last person who needed telling that, but I wasn't about to go there now. Lorcan's intense gaze was studying me, and I felt as if he could see into where I kept all my secrets. Why do I get the feeling you know all that anyway? How ridiculous, I said, with a laugh that would get me thrown out of RADA. Lorcan shrugged, but all this did was make the T-shirt ride up and expose more stomach. And put that away, I said, making a rough gesture around my own midriff, as the bell outside clanged loudly, which hopefully signalled that this was, at last, my missing clients. Lorcan's low, deep chuckle followed me all the way to the door. Hi! Peyton flashed a wide, very white, very straight-toothed smile at me as I hurried her and her fiancé in out of the weather and explained the situation about the office. Oh, that's fine. Oh my gosh, your house is just so cute. It's like something out of an Agatha Christie movie. Who's that one I love, sweetie? The old lady? Miss Marple, Patrick said, shaking my hand. That's it, Miss Marple. Not that you're like an old lady, obviously. Peyton looked momentarily flustered. I know what you mean, and thank you. I like it. Apart from the leaking roof and the swimming pool where my garden used to be. Do go through. Your best man is already here. Peyton squeezed Patrick's hand, the wide smile still on her face as they walked through, and I followed. What did I say about that dog? Patrick's face darkened as he finally saw Bod, now snoring quietly by Lorcan's chair. That was my decision, I said quickly, in order to head off any disagreements. I told Lorcan to bring the dog inside. He did initially leave him in the car, as you asked, but it wasn't fair on either of them. Lorcan was worried and Bod was scared. I'd rather the dog was safe and happy in here, and he's no problem. He can come any time. I glanced at Lorcan. I'm referring to the dog, of course. Patrick grinned. Glad to see Maddie's got the measure of you already, you big Egypt. His smile then faded a little. Are you sure, though? Patrick asked, tilting his chin towards the ball of fluff on the blanket. Another planner we saw got very uppity about it. Perhaps they were allergic, or just not a fan of dogs? No, Lorcan interjected. She was just a sour. He tailed off. She just made a big deal about how it wasn't in keeping with the tone of the wedding these two want. Like it had any connection at all. Ridiculous, he mumbled. But really wasn't being any trouble, Peyton added sweetly. And he's no trouble here either, and welcome any time. So, now that's settled. Shall we get on? Can I get you a drink to start? I can thoroughly recommend the homemade lemonade, Lorcan suggested. That sounds just perfect, Peyton said. Great, thanks, Patrick added, now staring at Lorcan, who stood up to help me with the lemonade. Mate, what on earth are you wearing? Funny story, and in a way, it's all your fault. 2 hours later, we were making great progress, and I was forming an even clearer idea in my mind and on paper about the wedding Patrick and Peyton wanted. I got the impression this was more Peyton's vision and that Patrick was just happy to give her whatever she wanted. Lorcan, so far, had mostly behaved himself, although I'd seen him bite his tongue a couple of times when Peyton went particularly misty-eyed about the romance of the occasion. So when will you be able to go out and take a look at the venue? Peyton asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Depending when it is, we might not be able to come, but we can talk by video, right? Oh, yes, of course. I assumed you would want to be there, but whatever works best for you. She exchanged a look with Patrick. There's actually something you should probably know. Oh? This sounded ominous. I glanced beside me at Lorcan, who was studying the grain in my lovingly worn and well-oiled oak tabletop. Patrick picked up the conversation. An opportunity has come up for me to do a lecture term at Stanford University. The guy who was going to do it had to drop out, and I really don't want to turn down the chance in case it doesn't come round again." He looked at Peyton, who nodded and wrapped her arm around his biceps. "Peyton is going to come with me so she can visit her family and friends on the way. Also, I really don't want to be away from Patrick for that long. I mean, I know I could fly back and forth, but it's not the same, is it?" Ah, the benefits of never having to work for a living. "No, it's not," I said, a little bewildered. "But you still want to get married at Christmas?" "Absolutely," Peyton confirmed. "All the plans are to be kept as they are. I mean, as far as we have plans, which isn't much thanks to our previous disaster." Worry showed in her eyes, and she scrunched her arm around Patrick's that little bit tighter. "But I have my dress, so that's good. And the paperwork for getting married in Ireland is all done. The rest, we thought, if you agree to it, we could do via video conferencing and messaging. I know the time difference makes things a bit of a challenge, but your references all said you could handle just about anything." "That's a bold claim to live up to," Lorcan said, fixing me with a cool stare. To be fair, I had to give him kudos for almost pulling the serious look off in that outfit. The only reason I didn't crack up was because years of doing this job had had the benefit of enabling me to master my poker face. Also, I wasn't intimidated by people. Even 6'5" rugby player types who towered over me. To be fair, I don't think Lorcan was actually trying to intimidate me. He was sure of himself, and he wouldn't know romance if it whacked him across the face with a box of milk tray. But he didn't appear to be one of those idiots who tried to use their size as a weapon or tactic. Someone had tried that once and discovered, to their cost, it just meant my fist was perfectly placed to have them singing soprano for the next week. It is, but one I feel I can back up. Admittedly, planning a wedding almost from scratch, without the bride or groom around, was a new one on me, but I didn't think they needed to know that. "You have all my lists, and obviously we've talked things over on email and now today. Lorcan knows our tastes and preferences, so with all that, we thought you two could kind of plan it together and then just run things past us before anything was locked in. You've already been great at picking up on all the things we want and suggesting perfect additions or alternatives. To be honest, after the last experience, I don't think I can deal with all the planning personally again now." Peyton put a hand to her cheek and leant against Patrick, who wrapped his arm around her and dropped a kiss on her temple. "It's all right, darling." She took a deep breath as though to calm herself. Lorcan rolled his eyes. Peyton was lovely, but it did appear there was a touch of drama princess about her, and I guessed that wasn't his type. "Anyway," Peyton continued with a brave smile, "with Lorcan and Patrick being like peas in a pod, we just know that between you, you'll make all the best choices. We didn't want to say anything until we had this meeting today, but it's so clear it's going to work out perfectly." "Right," I said, holding up a smile and fixing it on my clients, agreeing enthusiastically, but hopefully just shy of the nodding dog effect. "Yes, that's great. Whatever and however you want things done, we can make it work." This was definitely not how I had foreseen the planning for this wedding proceeding, but I prided myself on being able to adjust to all manner of situations. My eyes drifted to the ever-growing puddle in my garden, cutting me off from my studio, and I wondered how close the bucket upstairs was to full. This wedding was going to be perfect. It had to be. Chapter 4. Lorcan has kindly offered to be available as often as you need him. I'm sure I'll be able to do a good amount on my own, so hopefully I won't need to disturb you too much. You won't be disturbing me. Don't you have to work? I do, but I run my own business, and I have good people I can rely on. Plus, they know this is going on and how important it is. At this comment, Peyton beamed and turned to Patrick, who nodded down at her as he glanced at his friend, gratitude showing for a moment. I'd wondered about these two initially, following Patrick's demand and ensuing reaction to the dog. But in that moment it was brilliantly clear that their bond was deep and didn't need to be spoken. It just was. Lorcan continued, "I've told the team I'll be less on hand than usual for a while, but I'm always at the end of the line if they need me. It'll be great for Lorcan to take you to the venue too, as he knows the place so well." "You're familiar with the castle, then?" I tilted my head to meet Lorcan's eyes. Peyton let out a tinkly laugh. "Of course he is. It's his—" "Friends. It's my friend's place." "Oh, I see. That's handy." Patrick nodded, and Peyton did the same. "Very," she added. I thought there was the hint of a frown about her features, but as she was obviously a Botox fan, it was hard to tell. "So," I said, wrapping up our meeting. "It's obviously less time than we usually have to plan a wedding." Peyton's face fell, and I automatically reached out, taking her hand. "But as we already have a venue secured and you have your dress, that's 2 major items off the list. It will be fine, I promise. There's absolutely nothing to worry about." Her bright smile returned, and a perfectly manicured hand squeezed my less pampered one. Manicures had been one of the first things to go when money began getting tight. Peyton turned her smile to Patrick, and he took her free hand and kissed it. I smiled and glanced at Lorcan, who was just finishing another eye roll at the sweet gesture. I narrowed my eyes at him briefly. "And I'm sure, as the best man, Lorcan will be going above and beyond to ensure things go perfectly." I gave him a big smile, topped with an innocent blink, as all faces turned to his. He gave a small, acknowledging tilt of his head and smiled. "Of course." The other two looked at each other, caught up in the excitement of the moment, giving Lorcan enough time to fix me with a look that said he knew exactly what I was doing. I returned it with one of wide-eyed innocence, and he shook his head. He might not be a fan of the institution of marriage, and that was his prerogative, but he was going to be on board with this one, even if I had to tie him to the rigging myself. 2 weeks later, I realised that my kitchen wall had more interest in this wedding than Lorcan O'Malley, but luckily I was used to working alone. Peyton's suggestion that Lorcan and I plan the event together had admittedly horrified me, so the fact I hadn't seen or heard anything from him since the initial meeting suited me just fine. So, we were talking about the theme, and although I know your basic theme is winter's fairy tale, are there any elements that you'd like to incorporate into the day that we haven't yet spoken about? We were sitting in a swanky restaurant in a tucked-away alley in London, and I was looking forward to a relaxed meal and discussion with the bride and groom-to-be before they flew to the States tomorrow. As I sipped a glass of Cristal, Peyton insisted I have. The door opened, and across the small room I saw Lorcan fill its frame. "Oh, great." Patrick waved, and, having handed over his coat and taken his time charming the pretty hostess, Lorcan eventually wandered over to the table and greeted Patrick with a clap on the shoulder, and Peyton with a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. "Maddie," he said, taking the chair next to me, filling the space, his thigh inadvertently brushing mine as he did so. I quickly moved my legs further to the right. "Pleasure to see you again." "Lorcan, I didn't realise you were coming this evening." "Oh, I never miss a campaign meeting." "We're planning a wedding, Lorcan, not a war," I replied. He made a slight movement of his head, while his gaze remained on me as he lifted the champagne glass to his lips. I gave a tight smile, turned away, and downed the rest of my glass. Probably not the best idea, but I was hoping the alcohol might make him a little less whatever he was, and hopefully a little less good-looking. "So, whose idea was it to marry in Ireland?" I asked, trying to dig deeper and see what details I could winkle out to make the day even more special for the couple. "That was mine," Peyton said, glancing at her fiancé. "Patrick, darling that he is, was happy to marry anywhere, but I've always dreamed of marrying there, in a beautiful setting and connecting with my heritage." "Oh, you're Irish too?" Lorcan made a snort, which both Peyton and I ignored, but Patrick's look buried his friend 6 feet under. "Sorry, went down the wrong way." Lorcan pointed to the glass he'd just replaced on the table. I gave him a thump on the back a little harder than was strictly necessary. "Is that better?" I asked sweetly. "Much," he said, eyes boring into me. Across the table, Patrick and Peyton were grinning. "So," I continued, "you were saying that you have Irish ancestry too. Is that something you would like to incorporate into the wedding?" This time Lorcan remained silent, and Peyton explained her links to Ireland. "I do have Irish connections, yes. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find much during genealogy searches, but I think that's likely to do with the fact that a lot of names got changed during emigration, either through choice or when the names were registered at Ellis Island." "Ah, I understand." "Or it could be because the so-called relatives were non-existent in the first place," Lorcan mumbled under his breath. "Lorcan!" Patrick snapped. Peyton studied her beautiful engagement ring. "I was just making a comment. Lots of people find out their ancestry isn't what they thought it was." Patrick's brow darkened even more, and I sensed that this could escalate very quickly. I needed to keep this wedding on track, and by the looks of it, that meant keeping Lorcan O'Malley in check too. "Perhaps that's something you could get a professional onto at some point then, Peyton," I said smoothly. "But in the meantime, this is your and Patrick's wedding, which means you can do and have whatever you want." I gave Lorcan a pointed look as I made the statement, which he met, holding my gaze. Peyton looked up, her face relaxing and smiling at me, as Patrick wrapped his hand around hers. "Lorcan is rather protective of being Irish and doesn't really like to share," Peyton said in an uncharacteristic dig. He opened his mouth to reply, but I interrupted. "I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it," I said, grabbing his elbow beneath the table in warning, "and I'm sure he'll be as helpful as it is possible to be in our quest to get you to the perfect wedding. Isn't that right?" I said, turning to Lorcan with a wide smile. "Absolutely," he said, turning a smile on me, his eyes sending a completely different message to his mouth. We spent a while going over the things I'd already arranged for them, showing them the stationery I'd had designed and some ideas I'd put together for styling the castle, using the photos of it I'd seen online as a base. "Well, it looks like we're in pretty good shape. Now, you said that you're using a local supplier for the cake, is that right?" "Yes," Peyton smiled widely. "And they said they can fit you in any time for the tasting, so it's whatever suits you, really." I pulled up my work calendar on my phone and glanced through the following week. There were a few items in it, but nowhere near as many as I would have hoped for, or as many as my roof needed to be in there. However, image was everything, so I gave an and ah before advising that I could be pretty flexible and work around them. I felt Lorcan's eyes upon me, knowing he'd seen my too-empty calendar, and waited for the inevitable sarcastic comment. Instead, when I met his gaze, there was a look of understanding. "So, what works best for you, Lorcan?" Peyton asked. "I guess that depends on Miss Maddie here." "Okay, we can discuss that shortly." "And we thought you'd probably have a list of preferred caterers and would know who was the best in the area, so felt it was better to leave it to you, especially with our travel plans now." "Yes, of course, that's fine. I have your likes and dislikes, and I'm sure we can work on a menu that will suit. And you're definitely happy for us to choose the cake, too? I mean, it is your wedding cake." Totally. I'm on a very strict diet at the moment so that I definitely fit into my beautiful gown. You really don't have to taste very much, I explained. Literally just a nibble, and Izzy can always make adjustments to your dress. Peyton looked horrified at this suggestion. I mean, not that I think she will have to, I added, and could see Lorcan trying not to smile at my backpedaling. I'm just saying you don't have to starve yourself. And like I said, just a nibble of taste would be fine if you wanted to be involved in it. Seems like a waste of good cake to me. Ignoring Lorcan's comment, although I did feel he had a valid point on this occasion, I continued addressing Peyton. Just a taste? I couldn't possibly. My nutritionist has me on a restricted and very particular diet in order to cleanse my whole system and lift my energy and vitality. It's extremely important that I stick to the plan he's made for me. Unfortunately, that doesn't include cake, however small a piece. I stared at her for a moment and could practically hear Lorcan's eyes rolling in his skull. Okay, then, yes, Lorcan and I can do that. I have a few must-haves and must-avoids with the cake. Lorcan has his instructions. Peyton glanced at him and gave him a small smile, then continued talking. So, to clarify, I don't want anything with fruit or anything with cinnamon in it. Just in case I do have a tiny taste. She pulled a disgusted face as she said the word cinnamon, and I made a note on my pad in big letters that said, "No cinnamon," adding 3 exclamation marks for emphasis. Got it. And any preferences you do have, like would you prefer chocolate, strawberry, or vanilla? To be honest, I doubt I'll be eating any of it anyway. I mean, we're going on honeymoon straight after, so I still want to be looking my best, you know? I smiled over at Peyton and what looked like to me an already perfect figure. But I knew from previous history that if a bride or a groom wanted to diet before their wedding, then that was their prerogative. But I had to agree with Lorcan that it did seem like a waste of a good cake opportunity. And we're not doing that smushing of cake into each other's faces either. Peyton attempted another frown. I've never understood that. I mean, you go to all this effort to look amazing, hair, makeup, etc., then you ruin it all by smashing cake into each other's faces. I just don't get it. She looked around at us with a horrified expression, and we all nodded. To be fair, I had to agree with her. I'd had brides pay thousands for top makeup and hair artists to create their perfect look, only for it to be slathered a few hours later with cake and icing. So, okay, it's just me and Lorcan tasting? Yes, does that work? Of course, just let me know where and when. It's good of them to come over here with the samples. That speaks well to their commitment to the event. Always a plus point. Suddenly the table fell silent, and the others exchanged awkward glances with each other before focusing back on me. What have I missed? I asked, feeling heat creep into my cheeks as I checked my notes, flipping pages back and forth. Peyton reached across for my hand. No, I'm so sorry. I think it was something we missed. Or, rather, forgot to tell you. Chapter 5. Okay, I smiled. How bad could it be? I'd dealt with plenty of crises in my time as a planner, and whatever this was, I would fix it too. As you said, the supplier is local to the wedding. In the village that's adjacent to the castle, in fact. So far, so convenient. But they're not coming here for the tasting. We're going there. Or at least that was the original plan. Now, you and Lorcan are going there. I stared at her for a moment while my voice refreshed its memory about how to form words. Going there? Yes. To Ireland? Yes. Next week? Yes, that's okay, isn't it? The drip, drip, drip of my roof played in my brain. Yes, of course, absolutely. Wonderful! Peyton gave a small, excited clap. Perfect! And Lorcan can show you around the castle too while you're there, so you can see the layout and go over the plans we've made from the photographs. It'll be great that you see it in person this soon, and I'm sure it will make it so much easier for you too. I realised I was still nodding like the head of a dashboard ornament someone had just flicked. Yes, good idea, great. I turned to Lorcan. There was a bloody great grin on his face, and this time it wasn't understanding I saw in those blue eyes. It was, unmistakably, amusement. And don't you go breaking the hearts of any of Maddie's suppliers, Peyton said, wagging her finger at Lorcan. I wouldn't dream of it. I mean it. Lorcan drew a cross on his chest with his index finger. I promise. Peyton reached over and squeezed his hand. Thank you, she said before turning to me. There's a trail of broken hearts behind this one. I can imagine. And I could. The hostess he'd been chatting up when he got here had barely taken her eyes off him all evening, although he hadn't appeared to notice. Would going that soon be convenient for you? I asked Lorcan. Sure. There's a couple of projects to check up on over in Ireland anyway, so it works out just grand for me. He smiled pleasantly, but the mischief dancing in his eyes was obvious. Are you sure you can make it? Peyton asked. There was a tenseness to her shoulders, despite the friendly confidence she was clearly doing her best to project. Of course. I nodded. We'll make it happen. Fantastic! She did a mini clap, her smile wide and genuine, and I palpably sensed her relax. Do you want to make all the arrangements, Lorcan, so you're happy with everything, and liaise with Maddie? Sure. Just bill everything to Daddy, she added. I'll pay for my own flight, but I can arrange for Madeleine's to be on your dad's account, if you like. Save her having to add it onto your bill at the end. If you're sure, I'm quite happy to pay for yours too. He smiled reassuringly. Positive. I'll make the arrangements if Maddie's happy with that. Everyone turned to face me. Sounds great. Grand. I'm pretty sure I can sort something at short notice if you're available for a long weekend. This weekend? Yep. Oh. Right. Well, hang on. I knew there was nothing in either my work or social diary that couldn't be moved, but as Lorcan had already seen my too-empty work calendar and laughed at my colour-coded diarising system, I didn't need him snooping at my similarly coded social life. This weekend looks doable, I said, putting my phone back in my bag. If you're able to let me know the specifics as soon as possible, that would be great. I like to be organised and know what I'm doing when. Is that so? You could have fooled me, Lorcan replied. Lorcan, Patrick cautioned, although even his mouth had a curve to it. I didn't care. Organisation was wonderful. It meant you knew what was happening when and where and why, and that way you didn't get any nasty surprises. Or at the least, you lowered the odds. I waved Patrick and Peyton goodbye outside the restaurant, having exchanged hugs and kisses, and watched for a moment as they headed back to where Patrick had parked. They were driving to Heathrow tonight and flying off to the States tomorrow morning. I was about to say a brief goodbye to Lorcan when he spoke first. My God, your face was a picture. I turned on my heel and then ruined my planned haughty flounce by almost twisting my ankle on the cobbled back street. My arms flailed momentarily like an overzealous windmill before Lorcan reached out one strong arm, setting me back on my feet securely. Nice shoes, but not perhaps the most practical for these streets. Yes, well, I didn't know there were cobbles. Besides, had you not been taking up so much of the pavement? I made a vague movement with my arms, intimating his bulk and size. I wouldn't be standing in the gutter. But thank you for your sharply insightful comment. You're welcome. Good night, Lorcan. I turned again, more carefully this time, and began to walk away. Before I'd gone 3 steps, his melodic tones stopped me. "Don't you think we ought to talk?" "About what?" I looked back over my shoulder. It was getting late, and I was tired, and with rain forecast, I needed to make sure I had all my buckets emptied and back in place. "About our little trip away together." We'd been the last ones in the restaurant, and as he said this, the hostess stepped out.